Hello and welcome to FinextraTV. You join us in our virtual studio with Trisha Price, the Chief Product Officer at Pendo. Trisha, lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So this year at Finextra, we've spoken a lot about software and new technologies. Something that perhaps hasn't been discussed quite as much is the actual user onboarding practicalities. So can you just give us a little bit of context as to how important that part is when it comes to the overall success of an adoption?
Sure. All employees as well as customers of financial institutions are just bombarded with digital experiences. There's new software and changes to existing software coming at them constantly, and it can feel overwhelming. So whether you're a new user or you are implementing changes, onboarding is continuous. It's not just a one-time thing, and it's incredibly expensive for financial institutions to try to manage, and it's incredibly frustrating for the end user when they can't figure out what they need to do and how to get the job done that they're trying to accomplish. So onboarding is just really important, and I think the big change that we've really seen over the last couple of years is the fact that this onboarding isn't just a one-time thing.
And so if we think then about larger teams, we've got organizations with very different departmental needs. How can they ensure that each of these teams gets the individual experience they need without perhaps the elements that are too much and overcomplicated on their dashboards?
Sure. When you think about employees in different departments and teams and onboarding themselves to this complex technology, traditionally we did something like pull everybody out of their jobs, go into a classroom, learn about the particular piece of software, or could be 10, 20 different pieces of software and what those experiences are supposed to be like. And then they go back to their desk and they don't really remember what they learned, or the training, to your point about different departments, was very generic. And yet the job I'm doing in one department is wildly different than another, right? If you just think about commercial banking, for example, a relationship manager versus an underwriter, what they need to do with the same piece of loan origination software would be wildly different. So then you're going through very expensive in-classroom training where you're teaching the underwriters, you're teaching the relationship managers, but then they get back to their desk and there's some nuance when they're doing a particular task that wasn't taught, or they just can't remember, right? Like the context is lost. And then you make that even more complicated because what you taught them in the classroom changes. Software is not stagnant anymore. Technology changes typically everywhere, each week, each month. And so they learned something. So then you have to go to these other very expensive manual processes of emailing and newsletters. But again, do you really read it? If you read it, you might read it in a moment, but you need that information in context at the moment that you're getting the job done, the moment you can't figure something out in the particular software that you're engaging with. And again, to your point about different departments, are you writing a different newsletter for every single department, for every single set of employees? And then if this technology is end user facing, they're certainly not reading your newsletters.
Just to quickly pick up on your point around that software is not stagnant, is there an easy process to ensuring that the onboarding isn't just a case of constantly learning every day to use the software?
Yeah. So the best practice that we have really seen, and Liam, before I came to Pendo, I have been in banking technology for almost all of my career. I was the chief product officer at Encino before coming to Pendo. And so I've been watching banks struggle with this for a long time. But as a best practice of what I've seen, the way you solve this is in context learning, in context personalized communication. So what do I mean by that? I'm a banker and I log into my loan origination system. I'm an end user and I log into digital banking and I'm trying to figure out something, right? If I'm an end user, I'm trying to open up a deposit. If I'm a banker, I'm trying to get this deal done, right? And I'm trying to figure out what documentation is missing. Instead of learning that in a classroom, or because the software changed and we've moved where you upload or which document you really need, you guide the user at that exact moment. So I'm a relationship manager and I'm trying to figure out which documents I need to upload or where they go, which placeholder in the system. Right there, you pop up and say, hey, this has changed. It moved here. Or even our policy has changed and we're requiring a different kind of documentation for this particular deal. Go here. And you really guide them step by step in real time at the moment they're trying to get work done in the application. And that is really a best practice that saves considerable time and money for financial institutions and way less frustration for the employee themselves.
And you talk about money saving there and time saving. If we look at the fact that you do have these different contexts, you do have the fact that it needs to be rolled out across the company, how do organizations actually effectively track the return on investment of these fairly expensive softwares?
Great question. We've talked about the expense of training and onboarding, but let's take a step back and just talk about the overall expense of buying these complex employee-facing, generational sort of transformation applications. And how do you know you're getting a return on investment? And not just the traditional sort of B2B SaaS type applications, but today, agentic solutions, right? Everybody is trying to build an agentic solution, but for both categories, it's really hard to know if you're getting a return. And to me, the best way to know if you're getting a return, well, let me actually talk about the easiest way, but not the best way. And then I'll talk about the best way. The easiest first step in getting a return is, are people using the software? And a lot of times financial institutions think, okay, am I utilizing all the licenses I bought? But just because you're utilizing a license does not mean people are actually using the software. I saw one of the largest financial institutions in the world, and one of the really cool ways they were doing this, where they were calling it impressions. And impressions are any time an employee logs in and actually takes action within the application. And as they measured and used these onboarding and guiding techniques we were talking about earlier, they were able to double the impressions that were happening in the software, interactions in the software. And so measuring usage is really important and much stronger than using license utilization. But for true best practice of ROI, it's really, is the workflow happening quicker, right? Because if you were doing a particular job and then you invested in software, you put together a business case to be able to spend all of the millions of dollars that you needed to get this application and to get it up and running. So you put a business case together. Are you actually tracking the business case? Because for sure the business case said your employees were going to get the job done quicker, and it was going to cost less support than probably the traditional, older application that was brittle and complicated that you had before. And now if you're doing agentic interfaces, even better, right? So you really have to understand, how long did it take your employees to get a job done before? And how long is it taking for them to get it done now? And if you're able to measure that difference, you can really understand if you're getting an ROI.
Fantastic. Well, really insightful interview there. And thanks so much for joining us. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me today.